For 10,000 years, the galaxy had one law. One rule every civilization learned before it learned mercy. One rule carved into court halls, military academies, temple doors, and sealed chambers where grieving families waited for verdicts. It did not matter whether a species breathed oxygen, methane, or light. If pain was given, pain returned. A wrong must be answered with a wrong. Pain must be answered with pain. Blood must be answered with blood. They called it the Eternal Code. And for 10,000 years, it had never failed. Not once. On Earth Colony Kepler 9, Marcus Hale had never read the full code. He knew it existed, the way ordinary people knew distant wars and trade treaties existed. Huge things. Official things. Things that shaped lives from far away. But Marcus's life was not shaped by law. It was shaped by concrete, pressure lines, colony storms, and the sound of his children arguing over who had eaten the last piece of bread. He was 47 years old. A civil engineer. Father of 3. Not a soldier, not a diplomat, not the kind of man history ever turned its head to notice. He repaired bridges. He checked structural joints after meteor rain. He came home with dust on his boots and tea stains on his sleeves. His son Adrian used to say that made him more important than generals, because generals broke roads and men like Marcus made sure people could still reach home afterward. Marcus always told him not to speak nonsense. Adrian always smiled like the argument had already been won. That was what Marcus remembered most clearly later. Not the courtroom. Not the reporters. Not Judge Vaelor-Prime staring down from the bench with 4 centuries of legal memory behind his eyes. He remembered Adrian at the kitchen table, 19 years old, hair never sitting right, voice full of questions nobody else thought to ask. "Dad, if every civilization says revenge is justice," Adrian once asked, "then who decided justice had to look exactly like the crime?" Marcus had looked at his wife for help. She only lifted her cup. "You raised him," she said. "No," Marcus muttered. "He arrived defective." Adrian laughed so hard his younger sister threw a napkin at him. For 15 years, Marcus saved money for those questions. He took extra shifts during flood season repairs. He refused upgrades to the family rover. He wore the same work coat until the cuffs frayed and the left pocket no longer closed. When bonuses came, he moved his share into a sealed education account before the children could ask for anything. Adrian noticed eventually. He always noticed. "Dad," he said one night, standing in the kitchen doorway while Marcus reviewed a bridge report. "You don't have to send me away." Marcus did not look up. "Away where?" "To the university." Marcus's finger froze above the tablet. 3 star systems away, the Galactic University of Vaer accepted fewer human applicants than some planets send ambassadors. Its halls had trained diplomats, xenobiologists, treaty architects, and people whose names appeared in schoolbooks while they were still alive. For a family on Kepler 9, it was not a school. It was a door most people never saw open. "You are going," Marcus said. "It's too expensive." "I know. I can study here." "You can." "Then why?" This time Marcus looked at him. Because his son's mind had always been larger than the rooms that held him. Because when Adrian looked at the stars, he did not see distance. He saw unfinished conversations. Because Marcus had spent half his life repairing things built too small, and he refused to let his son become one of them. But he did not say all that. He only said, "Because you were not born to spend your life wondering what was on the other side of a closed door." Adrian crossed the kitchen, put both arms around his father, and held on like he was still a child. Marcus pretended not to feel his own eyes burn. The day Adrian left, the whole family went to the orbital lift station before dawn. His sisters cried first and denied it immediately. His mother adjusted his collar 3 times, though it did not need adjusting once. Marcus stood apart with both hands in his coat pockets. Adrian came over. "Say something wise." Marcus looked through the glass at shuttle lights climbing into violet morning. "Call your mother every night." "That's your wisdom?" "No," Marcus said. "That is survival." Then the boarding tone sounded. Marcus hugged him last. He was not a man built for station speeches. So he placed one hand on the back of his son's head, pressed their foreheads together and whispered, "Learn everything. But come back kind." Adrian's smile softened. "I promise." The calls began the first night. At first, the whole family gathered around the kitchen table to watch him speak from a dormitory window with alien towers glowing behind him. "Dad, the professors here are incredible." The next night, he called from a library where books floated in vertical rings. "Dad, did you know Vaelorians don't sleep? Not even once. They lower neural temperature instead. Can you imagine never dreaming?" On the fourth night, he whispered because his roommate was meditating upside down from the ceiling. "Dad, university is hard. But I'll manage." Every night. Without fail. Without excuse. Sometimes the calls were 5 minutes. Sometimes they lasted an hour. Sometimes Adrian talked until one sister fell asleep on the table and the other told him to stop describing alien cafeteria food because some of them still wanted breakfast tomorrow. Sometimes he spoke only to his mother, and Marcus listened from the next room pretending to check reports. But he never missed a night. Then one night the call did not come. At 2100 hours colony time, tea waited on the table. At 2110, Marcus said he was probably studying. At 2120, his wife checked the network and said the Vaer corridor was clear. At 2140, Marcus sent a message. "Busy?" No answer. At 22:15, he sent another. "Call when free." No answer. His wife told everyone to sleep. Her voice was calm enough to frighten him. The second night, there was still nothing. No one cooked. No one argued. No music came from the girls' rooms. Marcus sat beside the kitchen screen, refreshing the same empty message thread until the motion became mechanical. At 2100 hours, the call did not come. At 2130, Marcus stood. "I'm contacting the embassy." Then someone knocked at the door. Not hard. Not soft. 3 measured strikes. The kind used by people trained to deliver news without needing permission to enter. Marcus opened it. A galactic police officer stood outside in formal gray. The officer asked, "Are you Marcus Hale, guardian of Adrian Hale?" Marcus heard his wife inhale behind him. He wanted to say no. For one insane second, he wanted to lie to the universe itself. But the officer looked at him with the careful emptiness of someone carrying a sealed blade. Marcus gripped the edge of the door. "Yes." The officer lowered his eyes to the tablet in his hand. And in that small movement, before a single word was spoken, Marcus Hale understood that his son was never going to call again. The galactic court of Central Station Ares did not look like a place built for grief. It looked like a machine built to make grief official. The chamber rose in perfect circles of black stone and white light, each level carved for a different species, each seat adjusted to a different gravity, pressure, and body shape. Translators hovered above every witness platform. Recording drones floated in silence. At the center, beneath a ceiling shaped like a closed eye, stood the victim's guardian podium. Marcus Hale stood there with both hands resting on the rail. He had not slept since the officer came. He remembered fragments. His wife's hand over her mouth. His daughters standing frozen in the hall. The officers speaking carefully, every word polished by training and made useless by the fact that Adrian was dead. There had been a fight on campus. A Vaelorian student named Kraith, 7, had killed him. There were witnesses. There was evidence. The case was open and shut. Open and shut. Marcus had hated that phrase from the moment the officer said it. As if his son's life had been a door. As if someone had opened it, looked inside, and closed it again because the facts were tidy enough. Now the tidy facts sat on a glowing evidence wall in front of 200 beings. Adrian Hale. Human. 19. First-year student at the Galactic University of Vaer. Kraith, 7. Vaelorian. 21. Second cycle tactical law student. Incident location, Eastern Academic Corridor. Witness count, 11. Cause of death, blunt cranial trauma after impact against structural alloy. Intent, confirmed by admission. The words appeared clean and bright. Nothing about them resembled Adrian. Nothing on that wall showed the way his son overfilled silence. Nothing recorded how he used to tap his spoon against a cup when he was thinking. Nothing displayed the last message Marcus had sent him, still unread on the family screen. Call when free. Marcus looked down at his own hands. They were steady. That disturbed him more than shaking would have. Across the chamber, Kraith, 7 sat between 2 Vaelorian guards. He was tall, narrow, blue-gray skin stretched smooth over angular bones. His eyes were dark and flat, not cruel, not frightened, not even bored. Empty. Marcus had imagined a monster on the journey to Ares. Something visibly wrong. Something with blood still in its mouth. Something his grief could recognize. Instead, he found a young alien sitting very still. That made the room worse. Judge Vaelor-Prime entered without ceremony. The entire court rose. He was Aresian, old even by Aresian standards, his body long and severe beneath layered judicial robes. For centuries of trials had turned his face into something almost mineral. No anger. No pity. No impatience. Only law, arranged into a living shape. The judge sat. The court sat. No one coughed. No one whispered. Everyone knew why they had come. Journalists from 14 civilizations filled the observation arc. Diplomats watched from sealed balconies. Legal scholars had arrived not because the case was complicated, but because it was simple. Simplicity made the ritual clean. A human son was dead. A Vaelorian killer had confessed. A father had the right of response. The eternal code would move exactly as it had always moved. Judge Vaelor-Prime touched the file before him. Case 718. Guardian response hearing regarding the death of Adrian Hale of Earth Colony Kepler 9. The translator carried his voice into every ear, throat, membrane, and neural receiver in the chamber. The defendant, Kraith, 7 of Vaelor, has admitted responsibility for the death. Witness testimony confirms the sequence of events. Physical evidence confirms cause. No procedural dispute remains. Marcus heard the words, but they seemed to come from very far away. The judge looked at him. Marcus Hale. Marcus lifted his eyes. This court has confirmed that your son, Adrian Hale, was killed by the defendant Kraith, 7. Somewhere behind him, someone adjusted a recording drone. The tiny movement sounded too loud. Under Article 1 of the Eternal Code, Vaelor-Prime continued, the right of response belongs to the victim's guardian. You will decide what happens to Kraith, 7. The chamber became completely still. Not quiet. Still. There was a difference. Quiet meant no sound. Still meant every creature in the room had stopped moving because they were waiting for something they already knew. Marcus felt it then. The weight of 10,000 years pressing into the rail beneath his hands. A wrong must be answered with a wrong. Pain must be answered with pain. Blood must be answered with blood. He had heard the word since childhood, but never as a command aimed at him. Never as a blade placed gently in his palm. The judge folded his hands. Marcus Hale, what is your decision? Every face turned toward him. Reporters leaned forward. Diplomats watched without blinking. Legal observers prepared to record another clean application of the oldest law in the known galaxy. The expected answer waited in the room before Marcus could speak it. Execute him. It was not only allowed. It was normal. It was dignified. It was what fathers did when sons were taken. Marcus looked at Kraith, 7. The Vaelorian looked back. No fear moved across his face. No apology. No plea. Not even hatred. Only that same blank emptiness, as if death had passed through him and found nothing to disturb. Marcus's chest tightened. For a moment he saw Adrian instead. Adrian at the kitchen table, smiling over a question too large for the room. Adrian at the lift station, promising to come back kind. Adrian on the last call, tired but still trying to sound brave. Dad, university is hard. But I'll manage. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Judge Vaelor-Prime waited. The whole galaxy, it seemed, waited with him. Then Marcus realized the court was not waiting to hear his decision. It was waiting to hear its own law spoken through his grief. Marcus Hale, what is your decision? Judge Vaelor-Prime's question remained in the air. It did not echo. The courtroom had been designed too perfectly for echoes. Every wall absorbed excess sound. Every translator filtered hesitation. Every recording drone preserved only what law considered useful. But Marcus felt the question pressing against his skin as if the chamber itself had leaned closer. What is your decision? The answer was waiting inside him. Not because he had chosen it. Because grief had chosen it first. Execute him. The words sat behind his teeth, hot and ready. They had waited. Permission. 10,000 years of civilization stood behind them, steadying his hand, telling him he did not need to feel shame for wanting pain returned. He only had to speak, and the oldest law in the galaxy would carry the rest. Kraith, 7 would be taken from the courtroom. The court would record the response. Diplomats would nod. Reporters would file their histories. Marcus would go back to a house where Adrian's room still smelled faintly of metal polish, clean laundry, and the cheap tea he drank while pretending to study late. Nothing would be fixed. That was the first thought that stopped him. Nothing would be fixed. The realization came without mercy. It cut through the heat in his chest and left something colder beneath it. Kraith 7's death would not make Adrian's message change from unread to answered. It would not make the kitchen table hold 4 cups again. It would not give his wife a final call, or his daughters one more argument with their brother over music, food, or which star system had the ugliest architecture. It would only add one more absence to the galaxy. Marcus hated himself for thinking it. He wanted the anger back clean. He wanted the kind of grief the eternal code understood. A simple wound. A simple answer. But Adrian had never given him simple answers. Dad, if every civilization says revenge is justice, then who decided justice had to look exactly like the crime? Marcus closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, he saw his son at the kitchen table, not as a memory polished by death, but exactly as he had been, tired, curious, too thin because he forgot meals when he was reading, stirring too much sugar into tea while asking questions that made adults uncomfortable. He saw Adrian at the orbital lift station. Learn everything. But come back kind. I promise. Marcus opened his eyes. Kraith 7 was still watching him. The Vaelorian's face had not changed. No fear. No regret. No understanding. A young being who had taken a life and now waited to learn whether law would take his in return. Marcus suddenly knew that if he spoke the expected words, the room would relax. That was what disturbed him most. They wanted closure more than justice. They wanted the pattern completed so the discomfort could leave. Judge Vaelor-Prime leaned forward by the smallest fraction. Marcus Hale, he said, voice controlled. The court requires your decision. Marcus's fingers tightened around the rail. His wife was not in the courtroom. She had refused to come. Not because she lacked strength, but because she said she would not let strangers watch her grief become procedure. His daughters had stayed with her. So Marcus stood alone in the center of the oldest ritual in galactic law, holding the only thing the room had given him. He had thought the choice was between death and weakness. But that was not what Article 1 said. The right of response belongs to the victim's guardian. Not the right of revenge. Not the right of equal blood. Response. For the first time since the officer came to his door, Marcus heard the law clearly. Not as the galaxy used it. As it was written. A wrong must be answered. But answered how? His breath shook once. Then settled. Judge Vaelor-Prime said, your decision. Marcus looked at Kraith 7. He thought of Adrian's final promise. He thought of the last call that never came. He thought of a boy who had crossed 3 star systems because he believed other civilizations were worth understanding, even when they were difficult, cold, proud, or cruel. And Marcus understood the one thing he could not let the galaxy do. He could not let Adrian's death become proof that Adrian had been wrong. Marcus cleared his throat. The whole courtroom held its breath. Let him go. 1 second passed. Then 2. Nothing moved. The translators repeated the words across 14 languages, 12 audio ranges, 3 chemical signal systems, and 1 direct neural channel. Let him go. A journalist dropped a stylus. Somewhere in the diplomatic arc, a containment field flickered as its operator lost concentration. One Vaelorian guard turned his head sharply, as if the translator had malfunctioned. Judge Vaelor-Prime did not blink. I beg your pardon? Marcus's voice was quieter than before, but steadier. I said let him go. A low sound moved through the chamber. Not outrage. Not approval. Confusion. It spread in layers. Reporters spoke over each other. Legal observers opened emergency references. Diplomats turned toward their aides. One Arisian scholar stood halfway from his seat, then sat down again with his mouth still open. Judge Vaelor-Prime lifted one hand. The chamber silenced. Marcus Hale, he said carefully, do you understand the authority granted to you under Article 1? Yes. You understand that you may demand full punitive response? Yes. You understand that in this case, given the confirmed facts, such a response would be carried out immediately? Yes. Kraith 7's dark eyes narrowed slightly. It was the first movement Marcus had seen from him. The judge's voice lowered. Then state clearly what response you are invoking. Marcus forced himself not to look away. I forgive Kraith 7. This time, the courtroom did not erupt. It froze. The word entered the chamber like an object no one recognized. Forgive. The translators paused on it. Some rendered it as release without balance. Some rendered it as debt cancellation. One system failed entirely and displayed, concept unavailable. Judge Vaelor-Prime looked down at his console. Then at Marcus. Then down again. For centuries of law moved behind his eyes and found no prepared place to stand. Forgive, he repeated, not as a question, but as if testing whether the word had physical weight. Marcus nodded once. Yes. The judge's fingers hovered above the legal archive. That word does not appear in the Eternal Code. No, Marcus said. Then on what legal basis do you offer it? Marcus looked at the evidence wall. Adrian Hale. Human. 19. Then he looked back at the judge. You asked for my decision. Vaelor-Prime's face tightened by a measure almost too small to see. I did. The code gave me the right to respond. It did. Then this is my response. Silence fell harder than the first time. Marcus could feel the room searching for a way to reject what he had said. He could feel thousands of years of habit pressing against one sentence from an ordinary human father who had not slept in 3 days. Judge Vaelor-Prime looked at the text of Article 1. The court waited for him to correct the human. But the words on the archive remained exactly where they had always been. The victim's guardian shall hold the right of response. Not vengeance. Not execution. Response. For 10,000 years, no one had noticed the space between those meanings because no one had tried to stand inside it. Until Marcus Hale did. Vaelor-Prime slowly looked up. For the first time since entering the chamber, the judge had no ruling ready. And across the courtroom, Kraith 7's hands began to shake. The shaking began in Kraith 7's left hand. At first, only one finger moved. A small tremor against the restraint band. So minor that most of the courtroom would have missed it if the room had not been watching him with the intensity usually reserved for executions. But the Vaelorian guard beside him saw it. The guard's head turned. Then the second hand moved. Kraith 7 looked down as if the hands belonged to someone else. Vaelorians did not shake. Their bodies were trained against it from childhood. Their schools corrected emotional leakage before language fully formed. Their families taught stillness as dignity, silence as strength, and admission as surrender. A Vaelorian could lose a limb in public and keep his voice level. A Vaelorian could receive a death sentence and bow once without moisture touching the eye. But Kraith 7 stared at his own hands, and they would not obey him. One of the legal observers whispered something into a recorder. Judge Vaelor-Prime heard it. Silence, he said. The word cut cleanly through the chamber. Kraith 7 did not look at the judge. His eyes remained fixed on Marcus Hale, not with the empty stare he had worn since the hearing began, but with something struggling beneath it. Not fear. Fear would have been simpler. Not gratitude. Gratitude would have required understanding. This was confusion deep enough to hurt. He stood too quickly. Both Vaelorian guards moved at once, but Kraith 7 did not attack, flee, or reach for anyone. He only stepped toward the edge of the defendant platform until the restraint field caught him across the chest with a dull flash of blue light. His voice came out low. Why? The translator hesitated before carrying the word. It sounded broken in every language. Marcus felt every creature in the court turn back toward him. He had expected anger from Kraith, 7. Insult. Maybe contempt. He had prepared himself for the young Vaelorian to reject forgiveness as weakness, because that would have been easier to stand against. But Kraith, 7 looked like a machine that had been given a command outside its design. Why? He asked again. Marcus's throat tightened. He did not answer immediately, because the honest answer was too large for a courtroom and too small for what had been taken from him. Because I want my son back. Because I cannot have him. Because killing you will not change that. Because if I hand my grief to the same law that shaped your world, then your world gets to decide what my son's death means. Marcus looked at the evidence wall again. Adrian Hale. Human. 19. Then he looked at the being who had ended that life. My son believed hatred was lazy, Marcus said. A ripple passed through the journalists, but no one spoke. Marcus kept his eyes on Kraith, 7. He said hatred was easy because it never had to build anything. It only had to repeat what hurt it. Kraith, 7's jaw tightened. Your son insulted my doctrine, he said. The court shifted. There was the old shape of the crime. A sentence. A reaction. A blow. A body striking alloy. A life ending in a corridor where students had been walking to lectures 5 seconds before. Marcus's grip tightened on the rail. For a moment, his vision narrowed until all he could see was Kraith, 7's mouth forming the words. Your son insulted my doctrine. Marcus wanted to hate him cleanly again. Then Kraith, 7 added, barely above a whisper, I thought that made him weak. The courtroom did not move. Marcus heard his own breathing. Kraith, 7 looked down at his trembling hands. He refused to answer me with violence, he said. Even after I struck him first. Marcus stopped breathing. The evidence wall had not said that. The official summary had said fight. It had not said Adrian refused to strike back. Judge Vaelor-Prime's eyes shifted toward the prosecution archive. The prosecutor stiffened. Kraith, 7 continued, each word forced through a mouth that seemed built to reject it. He said I was not angry at him. He said I was angry because I had been taught there was only one way to be strong. A strange sound came from the observation arc. No one admitted making it. Marcus stared at Kraith, 7. He saw Adrian then, not as a memory but as a final act hidden inside the official record. His son standing in an alien corridor, facing a young Vaelorian trained to treat mercy as weakness, and still choosing words over fists. Still trying to understand. Still trying to come back kind. Kraith, 7's eyes lifted. I killed him for that. His voice cracked on the final word. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just enough. The translator caught the fracture and carried it to every species in the chamber. A Vaelorian guard took half a step back. Marcus felt something inside him tear open again, but this time the pain did not move toward revenge. It moved toward the terrible recognition that Adrian had been himself until the final second. That hurt worse. It also saved something. Marcus wiped one hand across his face. My son went to your university because he wanted to learn about your civilization, he said. Not defeat it. Not mock it. Learn it. Kraith, 7 said nothing. He believed understanding was harder than violence. The young Vaelorian's shoulders lowered. A tiny movement. But in that courtroom, it landed like a wall collapsing. Marcus looked at Judge Vaelor-Prime, then back at Kraith, 7. If I let them execute you today, Marcus said, then the last thing my son carried into this galaxy dies with you. No one translated late. No one whispered. Even the recording drones seemed to hover more carefully. Kraith, 7's lips parted, but no sound came out. He tried again. Still nothing. For a species that treated emotion as weakness, silence had always been armor. Now it was all he had left. Judge Vaelor-Prime lowered his gaze to Article 1 again. The ancient text glowed beneath his hands, unchanged, indifferent, suddenly insufficient. He had entered the hearing to process a verdict. Now the law itself was on trial, and the witness was a dead human boy who had refused to raise his hand. Judge Vaelor-Prime did not speak for a long time. That was the first sign that something had gone wrong. In 4 centuries of hearings, he had never needed silence to think. Law did not require thought once facts were confirmed. It required sequence. Evidence. Guardian response. Sentence. Record. Closure. But the sequence had broken. Not because Marcus Hale had challenged the eternal code. Because he had obeyed it too precisely. Vaelor-Prime looked at the ancient wording suspended above his console. The victim's guardian shall hold the right of response. He expanded the archive. Commentary unfolded in columns. 10,000 years of applications opened before him, retaliation rulings, blood price orders, sanctioned executions, controlled duels, generational debt settlements, pain equivalence judgments so old the species involved no longer existed. Every case had assumed the same thing. Response meant return. Wrong for wrong. Pain for pain. Blood for blood. Not one scholar had asked whether a victim could answer pain by ending its movement. Vaelor-Prime slowly lifted his eyes. Marcus Hale, he said, the eternal code does not contain a procedure for forgiveness. Marcus stood at the guardian podium with grief carved into his face. I am not asking for a procedure. The court cannot execute an undefined response. I defined it. The code does not recognize it. Marcus's voice stayed quiet. The code gave me the right to decide. A legal observer stood. Objection. The guardian is attempting to introduce an unregistered response category. Vaelor-Prime did not look away from Marcus. Sit down. The observer sat. Across the chamber, diplomats began exchanging messages behind privacy fields. Reporters whispered into live channels. The Vaelorian delegation had gone completely still, their faces disciplined, their eyes fixed on Kraith 7's trembling hands as if those hands had betrayed their whole planet. Vaelor-Prime spoke again. Marcus Hale, if this court accepts your response, Kraith 7 will leave this chamber alive. I know. He may return to Vaelor. I know. He may live decades. Marcus swallowed. I know. Then understand the full consequence of what you are saying. Marcus's fingers pressed into the rail. Judge, every consequence started before I entered this room. The chamber stilled again. Marcus looked toward Kraith 7, but he spoke to the judge. My son is dead whether Kraith 7 dies or not. My house is already changed. My wife already wakes up reaching for a sound that will not come. My daughters already stop speaking when his name gets too close to the table. His voice faltered, but it did not break. You are asking me if I understand the consequence of letting him live. I am asking whether this court understands the consequence of making grief automatic. Vaelor-Prime's expression did not change, but one of his hands closed slowly. Marcus continued. For 10,000 years, your law has taught victims what pain is supposed to become. It never asked what else pain could do. Kraith 7 lowered his head. The restraint field hummed softly against his chest. Marcus looked at him and felt no peace. That mattered. Forgiveness had not removed the rage. It had not softened the memory. It had not made Adrian less dead. It only refused to let the worst moment of Marcus's life command the rest of it. Vaelor-Prime looked once more at Article 1. Then he touched the court seal. By the authority of the Eternal Code, he said, each word measured like stone being placed over a grave, this court recognizes the guardian's response. The chamber seemed to lose gravity. Kraith 7 of Vaelor-Prime continued, your life is released into the custody of the consequence chosen by Marcus Hale. Kraith 7 looked up. No one understood the sentence. Not fully. Not even the judge. But the execution order did not appear. The restraints around Kraith 7's wrists opened with a soft metallic click. That sound moved through the courtroom harder than any scream could have. Kraith 7 stared down at his freed hands. For a long moment he did nothing. Then, with 200 beings watching, he stepped down from the defendant platform and stood before Marcus Hale. The guards reached for him. Vaelor-Prime raised one finger. They stopped. Kraith 7 tried to speak. Tried again. His voice came out stripped of doctrine. I do not know what this makes me. Marcus looked at the young alien who had killed his son. Neither mercy nor hatred felt large enough for the space between them. So he gave the only answer Adrian might have understood. Alive, Marcus said. Craith, 7 closed his eyes. And this time, when his hands shook, he did not hide them. Outside the courthouse, the noise arrived all at once. Reporters pressed against the security line. Diplomatic feeds shouted across open channels. Drones tracked Marcus Hale from 3 angles as if grief might finally explain itself if recorded closely enough. Every question sounded different, but all of them wanted the same wound opened again. Why did you spare him? Do you believe murder should go unanswered? Was this human mercy or human weakness? Marcus stopped walking. The guards around him tensed, but he lifted one hand, and for a moment the crowd remembered that the smallest man outside the courthouse had just changed the air inside it. My son taught me something, Marcus said. The questions died. He said there are 2 kinds of people who receive pain. Those who pass it forward because it is all they were given. And those who stop it, even when stopping it costs them everything. A reporter called, "Which one are you?" Marcus looked past the lights, past the towers of Central Station Ares, toward a sky that did not contain Kepler 9. I am Adrian's father. That was all he gave them. That night, Marcus sat alone in his hotel room with the lights off. His wife had called once. Neither of them spoke for long. They only listened to each other breathe through the distance, because some conversations cannot survive words too early. After the call ended, Marcus remained by the window. Then the door chime sounded. A guard appeared first on the monitor. Behind him stood Craith, 7. Marcus stared at the screen. The old anger rose so fast it nearly became speech. Then he saw Craith 7's posture. No pride. No Vaelorian stillness. His shoulders were bent as if the body that had walked out of court alive had become too heavy to carry. Marcus opened the door. The guard reached to block the alien. Marcus shook his head. Craith, 7 stepped inside. For a long time, he stood near the entrance, unable to cross the room, unable to leave it. I have nothing to offer you, Craith, 7 said at last. No justification. No explanation large enough. Marcus said nothing. That day, your son spoke against my doctrine. I struck him. He would not strike back. I struck again. His mouth tightened. When he fell, I waited for him to hate me. Marcus's hand closed around the back of a chair. He did not. Craith, 7 looked up. He looked confused. Not afraid. Confused, as if he still believed I could choose differently. The room seemed to shrink around that sentence. Craith, 7 tried to hold Marcus's gaze, but failed. In my culture, we do not admit wrong. We correct weakness. We erase shame. We survive by never lowering our heads. Slowly, with visible effort, he lowered his head. I was wrong. The words did not sound like apology. They sounded like bone breaking. Marcus felt no peace enter him. No music. No sudden cleansing. Adrian was still dead. The chair beside the family table would still be empty. Forgiveness had not healed the wound. It had only kept the wound from becoming a weapon. Craith, 7 whispered, you gave me a life. I do not know what to do with it. Marcus thought of Adrian in the kitchen, asking impossible questions with too much sugar in his tea. You will figure it out, Marcus said. It takes time. 6 months later, Judge Vaelor-Prime submitted a formal proposal to the Galactic Council. Amendment to the Eternal Code, Article 1. The victim shall hold the right of response, to seek punishment, or to grant forgiveness. Both are valid. Both carry equal dignity. Both carry equal power. The council debated for 3 months. Some called it contamination of law. Some called it weakness disguised as philosophy. The Vaelorian delegation objected for 17 straight sessions, though Craith, 7 never appeared beside them. Then an Aresian delegate stood beneath the great council dome. In 10,000 years, she said, one civilization used this option. One human father. One murdered son. One killer spared. And that single case has held this council in argument for 3 months. She looked across the chamber. Does that not tell us the law was smaller than the pain it claimed to govern? The vote was called. The amendment passed. The new clause was written into galactic law beneath Article 1, where every civilization would have to read it before asking grief to choose. The human clause. The victim holds the right to decide the fate of their own pain. Vengeance. Or forgiveness. In both there is strength. In both there is dignity. Marcus received the notification on Kepler 9 while standing in his kitchen. He read it once. Set the phone down. Made himself a cup of tea. For a moment, his hand moved toward the sugar. Then stopped. Outside, the evening storms rolled quietly over the colony fields. Marcus carried the tea to the porch and sat alone, watching rain gather on the rail. "You were right, son," he said softly. The tea went cold. Marcus did not notice. Somewhere across the galaxy, an ancient law now carried Adrian Hale's silence inside it.